Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm your host, Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. Indiana has been really quiet in the transfer portal lately. They had a couple of big splash additions, but news has been really quiet on the basketball front, and the Hoosiers needed a jolt of good energy coming their way. And they got some big news with Xavier Johnson being granted the medical hardship waiver that he was looking for from the NCAA. He is getting a 6th year of eligibility, and I'm going to go over how important I think that could be for Indiana next season, and whether I think that that will be enough for the Hoosiers to be a good basketball team next season, or do I think that they need some more players through the transfer portal. Now, Indiana, again, they have had a lot of success the last couple of seasons with Mike Woodson as head coach. Before that, in the Archie Miller era, there were some dark times for the Indiana Hoosiers, but Mike Woodson has brought forth Indiana back into the limelight, and they are starting to have a lot of success again. But this offseason is going to be really huge for Indiana because the Indiana Hoosiers are losing two very great basketball players and program legend Trayce Jackson-Davis and freshman phenom Jalen Hood-Schifino to the NBA draft. Both players are gone, and those are tough losses for the Hoosiers. They're also losing seniors Race Thompson and Miller Kopp because both have exhausted their eligibility, and you also have Tamar Bates, Jordan Geronimo, and Logan Duncombe, who have all entered the transfer portal, and two of those players have found new homes in Tamar Bates and Logan Duncombe. Jordan Geronimo is still in the portal, so he could return to Indiana, but we don't know what Geronimo is going to end up deciding to do. But Xavier Johnson was the wild card because he broke his foot against the Kansas Jayhawks back in December, and he had played in 31% of the games that Indiana had this past season. And usually the NCAA will grant a medical hardship waiver one time for a player that gets hurt in the first 30% of games in the season. So Xavier Johnson was flirting with that rule, having played in 31% of the games, and he got hurt right at the beginning of that Kansas Jayhawk games. So Xavier Johnson decided to not return to Indiana this past season and play at all toward the end of the year. He maybe could have played. I think he still was kind of banged up overall. Maybe would not have been 100% if he did return, but Xavier Johnson wanted to have a chance to be able to come back for the Indiana Hoosiers this season. He put all of his chips into the NCAA basket, and the NCAA did grant Xavier Johnson another year of eligibility. And this is really interesting because a lot of players have been denied this in the past if they're just over the limit, but Indiana got very lucky that the NCAA was very generous and gave Xavier Johnson another year of eligibility because they did not have to, because he technically was over the limit. But this is huge for Indiana because the Hoosiers have a lot of uncertainty right now because of all the players that I've already outlined that they are losing in this offseason, and they're going to have to bring in a lot of talent in if Indiana wants to be competitive next season in the Big Ten, or they could take a massive step back overall this season. That is not where Mike Woodson wants the Hoosiers to go. He wants them to continue to trend in the right direction and not back in the wrong direction, back where Indiana was in the Archie Miller era. And looking at Xavier Johnson, he will be going into his 6th season of college basketball, so he is an experienced player. Him coming back for Indiana is massive because he's a guy that will be more experienced than almost any player in college basketball next season. And he averaged 10 points per game last year, being paired next to Jalen Hood-Schifino. But now that Jalen Hood-Schifino is gone, Xavier Johnson's going to have the whole backcourt to himself again. And in the year that Jalen Hood-Schifino was not on the team, Xavier Johnson averaged around 12, 13 points per game. So definitely Xavier Johnson has the potential to improve his points per game average for Indiana next season, now that he's going to have the backcourt all to himself again. And he's also a guy that averages around 4 assists and 4 rebounds. So he is a really good player. He also shoots around 37% from the three-point line in some of his better years of college basketball. And he's a guy that can get into the lane and wreak havoc on opposing defense because he can do the pick and roll with centers like he did with Trayce Jackson-Davis the past 2 seasons, and he can also get to the rim and lay it in. And he's a great perimeter defender, something that Jalen Hood-Schifino was not quick enough to be able to stop some of the quicker guards in the Big Ten this past season. Xavier Johnson can do that, so if Xavier Johnson can get healthy, and if Xavier Johnson can return at a healthy and high level for the Hoosiers next season, then Xavier Johnson could be a great player for the Hoosiers next year, and maybe have a potential shot to squeak into the NBA after he is done playing college basketball for Indiana. But also looking at Indiana, there's a lot of question marks with the rest of the roster because yes, Xavier Johnson is coming back. That is huge, but the Hoosiers do have 2 4-star recruits coming in, Gabe Cupps and Ja'Kai Newton. I think both players will be solid for Indiana next year. They'll both probably have solid roles for the Hoosiers next season, especially if Indiana cannot get any more transfer portal players. And speaking of transfer portal players, Indiana has brought in center Peyton Sparks and center Khalil Ware, both from Ball State, and Peyton Sparks and Oregon from Khalil Ware, respectively. And Khalil Ware was a former 5-star McDonald's All-American, and I think he could be a guy that is potentially huge for Indiana next season because Trayce Jackson-Davis is gone, and Khalil Ware is a 7-foot center that can shoot threes, and he has a lot of untapped potential. And he did not have a great season for Oregon this past year, averaging 6 points per game. But if he can go to IU and average 11, 12 points per game, he could be a guy that potentially can be an NBA player in the next season. He can make Mike Woodson look even better, getting another player to the NBA draft. I don't think Khalil Ware and Peyton Sparks will be guys that can just automatically replace Trayce Jackson-Davis' production, but if they can get over halfway there and replacing his production, that will be huge overall. And Indiana also has Malik Reneau coming back. And Malik Reneau is a rising sophomore. He averaged 6 points per game behind Race Thompson and Trayce Jackson-Davis. I think Malik Reneau can step in and maybe average double-digit points next year for IU. And if he can step up next to Khalil Ware, if they can both play next to each other, or if one plays and the other comes off the bench, and vice versa, I think that will really help seal up that front court for IU in a variety of ways and help the Hoosiers be competitive in the Big Ten next year. But where Indiana has a lot of issues is the returning guard and wing talent. Yes, they have Trey Galloway coming back, and he's a guy that averaged 7 points per game this past season, and he shot the three ball at a fairly high level, even though it was on a low volume of attempts. But Trey Galloway is not a guy that is going to be able to put up 15 points per game. He might improve on his 7 points per game next season in an increased offensive role, but he's not going to be a main primary option in the offense. Indiana also has CJ Gunn and Caleb Banks coming back, two freshman players that actually have a lot of potential and could improve for Indiana next season and improve on their 2 points per game averages. And Indiana has Anthony Leal on the roster, but he does not play that much, and it's going to be hard to expect him to improve at this stage of his career now that he will be a senior along with Trey Galloway. But Indiana's wing and guard position is very weak. Yes, Indiana's two freshman guards coming in, and yes, Indiana has Xavier Johnson and Trey Galloway returning. But specifically that 3 spot where Miller Kopp was this past season for Indiana, Mike Woodson is going to have to find a way to land a guy in the transfer portal. Getting Khalil Ware and Peyton Sparks was a nice start, but Indiana has not gotten a transfer portal player since Khalil Ware, and that was over 2 weeks ago. And the portal is starting to slow down a bit. There are still good players in the portal, and I know that Mike Woodson might be starting to look toward 2024 and all the high school recruits that Indiana could get in that class, and they're looking at some great players, some potential 4- and 5-star players that maybe will go to Indiana because of the fact Mike Woodson has them trending in the right direction. But this is still a really important season for Indiana. Maybe you're not going to be a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament like you were this past season, but Indiana needs to make the NCAA tournament to continue the success under Mike Woodson and have Indiana still a program that is at least not starting to fall apart and go in the wrong direction again and be able to maintain the success of the past 2 seasons. And I don't think Indiana has enough at the guard and wing positions. Getting Xavier Johnson back is huge to seal up the point guard spot, and Gabe Cupps can be a point guard that comes off the bench behind Xavier Johnson. So I think Indiana's got the point guard position figured out. I think Peyton Sparks and Khalil Ware and Malik Reneau have the center and front court depth figured out, but Indiana in the 2 and 3 position need to find some more players through the transfer portal to have more success next year, because if they don't, Indiana will only have 10 players on scholarship next season, and I don't think that's going to be good enough. Tom Izzo, Michigan State did it last year, but they also had some really good returning players at all the positions, and Tom Izzo was able to develop and get by with what he had, but I don't think Indiana's going to have enough for next season. Trey Galloway is a solid player, and Caleb Banks and CJ Gunn could improve, but Indiana needs some more transfer portal players if Indiana wants to have a lot of success next season. But getting Xavier Johnson back is huge for the Indiana Hoosiers. That is a step in the right direction. I think it was a good decision by the NCAA to grant the medical hardship waiver for Xavier Johnson because he wasn't over the limit by a lot on the amount of games that he had to be able to play to get that medical hardship waiver, and he couldn't go over the limit. But I'm really glad the NCAA gave Xavier Johnson the medical hardship waiver. I think he did deserve it. He was out for so long last season. It was very unfortunate that he was for the Hoosiers because maybe they could have been better last season. But now he's going to be coming back for Indiana this season, and the Hoosiers could have a lot of success with him next year. He could be a guy that averages 11, 12 points per game, 4 assists, and 4 rebounds, and he should be able to help out Peyton Sparks and Khalil Ware make the transition over to the Big Ten Indiana, getting some pick and roll action to them and some pick and pop, especially with Khalil Ware, who can hit threes as well at the top of the key at his 7-foot frame. So I think Mike Woodson has done a good job getting Peyton Sparks and Khalil Ware, and Indiana now also getting Xavier Johnson as well is huge. His return should help the Hoosiers tremendously for next season. But if Indiana is going to be able to be a great team next season in college basketball, I think they need to do a little bit more in the transfer portal to have a lot of success. But getting Xavier Johnson back through the NCAA, giving him a medical hardship waiver, is definitely a step in the right direction for the Hoosiers. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Comment down below what you think about Xavier Johnson getting a medical hardship waiver from the NCAA to be able to come back for a 6th season of eligibility for the Hoosiers next season, and whether you think the NCAA made the right decision to give Xavier Johnson an extra year of eligibility, and whether you think Mike Woods is going to have to do more in the transfer portal to help Indiana be a good basketball team next year. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I will see you next time.